The 5 most deadly inmates who shook the US prison the moment the prison went dark. The alarms were already screaming, but then, boom. The entire hallway of Red Cell Block went black. COs shouted. Radios crackled. Doors slammed. But inside that darkness, 5 of the most dangerous inmates the US has ever held were moving with purpose. A flashlight beam cut through the air, just for a second, revealing a figure standing perfectly still in the center of the hallway. His eyes didn't blink. His breathing didn't change. And written across his arms were tattoos that told a lifetime of violence. It was Inmate #1, the one guards called the Ghost. Before the CO could even react, a scream echoed from the far end of the block. Another inmate was down. Another one of the 5. The prison suddenly realized. The 5 most deadly inmates in US custody were all awake, all alert, and all acting at the exact same moment. Coincidence? No. Something had triggered them. But what? And worse, what were they about to do next? Fade to black. The Ghost, the inmate who could disappear in plain sight. When the lights flickered back on that night, guards rushed toward the sound of the scream. Most inmates were cowering under blankets or pressed against their doors. But not the Ghost. He sat calmly on his bunk, hands folded, eyes locked onto the camera. He didn't flinch, didn't sweat, didn't even blink. This man earned his nickname because no camera ever caught him moving. One second he'd be there. The next second, gone. Standing somewhere else entirely. Even the officers said the same thing. You never see him do anything. You only see the results. He never raised his voice. Never fought openly. Never broke into a sprint. And yet somehow, in 3 different prisons, things happened around him that no one could explain. A rival inmate suddenly collapsing in the yard. A weapon found in a laundry bag he never touched. A guard reporting hearing whispers even when the Ghost wasn't in the room. He was quiet, controlled, calculating. And that night, when the hallway went dark, he wasn't the only one acting strange. Because in the medical unit, locked behind triple steel doors, Inmate number 2 had just done something everyone thought was impossible. The surgeon, the inmate who used a brain like a weapon. The medical wing of Red Cell Block was supposed to be the safest part of the prison. 3 locked doors, bullet-resistant glass, and guards on patrol every 15 minutes. But on the same night the lights went out and the Ghost was seen standing silently in the dark. Something else was happening deep inside that very unit. A faint buzzing sound hummed through the hallways. Not loud, not obvious, but steady, like someone gently scraping metal against metal. The nurses heard it first, then the guards, then the warden. But by the time they reached the 3rd door, the buzzing stopped. Dead silence. And standing right behind the glass, smiling calmly as if he had been expecting company, was inmate number 2, known across the country as the surgeon. Kitchen knife. Who was he really? The surgeon didn't look like the kind of inmate whose name made officers nervous. He wasn't huge. He wasn't loud. No tattoos. No threats. Instead he looked normal. Dangerously normal. But what made him one of the 5 most deadly inmates in the US prison system wasn't strength. It was the way his mind worked. He remembered everything. Every hallway. Every guard rotation. Every conversation he overheard. Every tool he ever saw. And he could turn anything, even broken plastic, into something that could cause serious harm. Officers said. When he looks at you, you feel like he's not seeing a human. He's seeing a blueprint. Which is why everyone panicked when they realized that during the blackout, the surgeon had taken apart an entire medical cart using only his hands. He unscrewed bolts with his fingernails, bent metal with pressure points no one understood, used friction to heat and weaken pieces. One nurse later said. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look stressed. It was like he was doing a puzzle he already solved in his head. And when the guards entered the room, that cart was laid out on the floor, piece by perfect piece. Not broken. Not smashed. Disassembled. Perfectly. What was he planning? That was the question everyone asked. Because a disassembled medical cart on its own wasn't dangerous. But what he did next shook every officer to the core. When they searched the room they found nothing. No metal pieces. No screws. Not even the rubber wheels. Everything was gone. Confiscated? No. Hidden? No. The surgeon had somehow done something impossible. He used the blackout to build something, and no one knew what it was. The warden ordered an emergency lockdown. Every inmate was counted. Every hallway was searched. But nothing turned up. And that's when they realized. Only one area hadn't been checked. A small, restricted back hallway that connected medical to solitary confinement. A hallway only 3 people in the entire prison had access to. And somehow, its lock had been quietly melted from the inside. The surveillance officer replayed the camera footage dozens of times. The lights go off. The camera switches to infrared. For a moment, all you see is darkness. Then, just for a fraction of a second, there's a spark, a flash, a glow. It wasn't enough time to see what the surgeon made, but it was enough to understand what everyone feared. He built something capable of cutting steel. How? From what? With what power? The footage didn't answer those questions. And when the lights came back on, the surgeon was sitting calmly on his medical bed, hands folded, smiling politely at the guard walking in, as if nothing had happened. The surgeon's true power, precision. The ghost was deadly because he could disappear. He moved like smoke. He never left evidence. But the surgeon, he was deadly in a way that didn't involve hiding at all. He didn't threaten. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply outsmarted everyone. He learned how to read lips, perfectly. He memorized guard badge numbers in seconds. He heard footsteps through 3 walls. And the creepiest part? When he spoke, his voice was warm, calm, friendly, like a doctor reassuring a patient. One guard once asked him jokingly, "Why do they call you the surgeon?" The inmate smiled softly, leaned forward and whispered, "Because I know exactly where to make the first cut. And the last one." The guard transferred out 1 week later. Why did he move during the blackout? Everyone knew the surgeon didn't act without a reason. He didn't break rules randomly. He didn't improvise. His entire life was built on precision, which meant that if he melted a lock, if he moved parts from a medical cart, if he positioned himself near a restricted hallway, he was preparing for something. But the warden noticed something else. The surgeon acted at the same exact moment that the ghost stood in the hallway of Red Cell Block. 2 inmates who had never spoken, who were kept in different units, who had no communication, yet somehow, they moved in perfect synchronization. That terrified the administration, because if 2 of them coordinated, maybe all 5 did. And the prison had no idea what the connection was. Then came the discovery. At 4:32 a.m., just 3 hours after the blackout, a rookie guard noticed something strange. A message. A tiny one. Scratched into the side of the medical cart, barely visible unless you were looking for it. 3 words. Phase 1 complete. No signature. No initials. No explanation. But the chilling part? The message wasn't carved in the style of the surgeon. His marks were always smooth, deliberate, controlled. This message was rough, fast, chaotic. More like someone scratched it in a hurry. Someone with a different style. Someone like another one of the 5. That was the moment the warden realized. The surgeon wasn't working alone. And he wasn't just building something. He was sending a signal. Puzzle piece the guard who noticed too much. There was one officer who couldn't stop thinking about that message. Officer Ramirez, young, smart, new to the job. He noticed patterns others ignored. The ghost moved at the same moment the blackout hit. The surgeon acted during the same window. The melted lock was on a hallway that connected to solitary confinement. And in solitary was someone even more dangerous than the first 2. Inmate number 3. Ramirez pushed his theory to the captain. They're not acting randomly. They're following steps. Someone is coordinating them. The captain laughed it off. Until something happened that no one could ignore. Police car light the count that didn't add up. At 5:15 a.m., officers performed a full emergency count of every inmate. Every name. Every number. Every cell. The ghost, present. The surgeon, present. Everyone else, present. Except for one cell. In solitary. The door was locked. The camera was working. No one had come or gone. But the inmate inside wasn't supposed to be able to move without restraints. Not supposed to walk. Not supposed to stand. And yet, when they checked the cell through the slot, the inmate was standing perfectly still, facing the door. Unmoving. Staring. Officer Ramirez stepped closer. The inmate didn't blink. Didn't twitch. Didn't speak. But something was off. Very off. His wrists were bare. His restraints were gone. Removed. And sitting neatly folded on the bed, arranged with surgical precision, were the straps, buckles, and locks that had been holding him down. As if someone had undone them with expert skill. As if someone had performed surgery. Inside solitary. Inside a sealed cell. On an inmate who had been asleep. Or at least they thought he was asleep. Officer Ramirez stepped back, heart hammering. And then he noticed something even worse. A tiny piece of metal. Sitting under the inmate's foot. A piece shaped like a gear. a gear from a medical cart, which meant the surgeon hadn't hidden the pieces. He had delivered them directly into solitary. To inmate number 3. Warning: who was inmate number 3? The moment his restraints were found undone, the entire prison froze. Because the man standing still in that solitary cell, the man now holding one of the surgeon's stolen metal pieces, was the one inmate the prison feared more than all the others. He didn't speak, didn't socialize, didn't react. He had been in solitary for years, because when he wasn't, terrible things happened. They called him the prophet. Not because he was religious, not because he predicted anything, but because he saw patterns in chaos, and sometimes acted on them before anyone else understood what he was doing. He was the kind of inmate who could watch 2 officers argue and know exactly how the rest of the shift would play out. He could hear a radio crackle and know whether a fight was about to break out in the yard. He once told a warden, "You don't run the prison. The rhythm does." What rhythm? No one knew. But he said it calmly, confidently. And hours later a riot erupted exactly when he said it would. That's why he was kept in solitary. And now, he was suddenly free from restraints, standing silently, holding a gear the surgeon had delivered to him through methods no one understood. 3 deadly inmates, 1 blackout, all moving in sync. The moment that changed everything. Officer Ramirez raised the alarm. Guards rushed to solitary. Shields ready. Tasers out. But something stopped them cold. The prophet lifted his head. And for the first time in years, he spoke. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just one calm sentence. Phase 2 begins at sunrise. The guards froze. The warden was called immediately. But the prophet didn't say anything else. He didn't move. He just held the gear gently between his fingers like it was a key. Or a symbol. Or a warning. What was phase 2? What were these inmates planning? And why sunrise? No one knew. But there was one terrifying possibility. If the ghost moved during phase 1. If the surgeon built something during phase 1. If the prophet was freed during phase 1. Then the remaining 2 deadly inmates had not yet acted. Which meant sunrise was going to be worse. Much worse. Sunrise as the sky began to brighten. The prison went into full emergency mode. Extra officers arrived. Every door was reinforced. Every inmate was locked down. But Officer Ramirez noticed a detail no one else did. At the exact moment the sky began to glow orange, the ghost stood up in his cell. The surgeon smiled in medical. And the prophet placed the gear on the floor, gently. As if waiting. As if anticipating. As if listening for someone. Someone who hadn't acted yet. Someone the prison feared more than all the rest combined. Inmate number 4. The Kingmaker, the inmate who could start a war with just his voice. As sunrise crept over the prison yard, a strange, heavy silence settled across Red Cell Block. The kind of silence that made even the toughest inmates stay still. Listening. Waiting. Something was about to happen. Everyone felt it in their bones. The ghost was on his feet. The surgeon was calm and ready. The prophet was standing in solitary, holding that metal gear like it meant something bigger. But the real danger wasn't coming from any of them. Not yet. It was coming from a place far more unexpected. The general population wing. A place filled with noise, arguments, routine chaos, but ironically the one place the guards felt they understood. Until today. Because today inmate number 4 woke up. And when he woke up, entire prison systems trembled. Crown: who was he? The inmate guards called the Kingmaker. He wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the strongest. But in every prison he had ever been sent to, he ended up in control. Not because he fought his way to the top. Not because he intimidated people physically. But because he understood people. Their weaknesses. Their ambitions. The things they feared. The things they wanted. If the surgeon saw blueprints, the Kingmaker saw human nature. He could walk into a yard full of rival groups and somehow convince them not to fight. Or convince them to fight, if he needed chaos. He never raised his hands. Never made a weapon. His voice alone was enough. One inmate once said, "He don't need muscle. He got information. And people fear the man who knows too much." And that was the truth. The Kingmaker collected secrets the way some inmates collected commissary. Debts. Favors. Weaknesses. He controlled everything indirectly, through whispers, alliances, and perfectly timed conversations. No one ever saw him act directly. But everyone felt the ripple of his decisions. Why he was considered deadly. Most dangerous inmates could hurt one person at a time. But the Kingmaker? He could turn an entire block upside down, without touching anyone. When he whispered one sentence to a rival group in Nevada, a riot broke out within 48 hours. When he made a remark to a guard in Louisiana, the entire shift schedule collapsed from disputes. When he spoke to a warden in Texas, 3 officers resigned within a week. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. He understood how people reacted. He understood how fear spread, how anger brewed, how jealousy grew, how rumors multiplied, and he used those reactions like tools. That's why the Department of Corrections labeled him one of the most socially dangerous inmates in the country. They kept him separated, limited his visits, monitored every conversation. But it didn't matter. He always found a way to make his influence reach farther than anyone expected. And that's why the morning of the blackout terrified the administration. Because somehow, the Kingmaker knew it was coming. Telephone receiver, the call that should have been impossible. At 6:12 a.m., minutes after sunrise, the phone in the warden's office rang. Not the main line. Not the recorded line. The private internal line. The one only 5 people in the prison had the number to. And only one inmate ever managed to dial in from inside the system. The Kingmaker. The warden answered cautiously. All he heard was a calm, steady voice. I think you'd better get to the yard. You're about 45 seconds away from losing control. The call ended. No threats. No demands. Just a warning. The warden froze. Why would he warn them? Why now? What did he gain by this? Was it a distraction? A trap? A part of the mysterious Phase 2 that the prophet talked about? The warden rushed downstairs, and what he saw made his blood turn cold. Fire the yard shifted in seconds. It didn't happen gradually. It didn't build up. The tension shifted instantly. A group of inmates usually kept separate were suddenly gathered together, talking in low voices. Another group, traditionally hostile toward them, stopped mid-exercise and watched closely. A third group formed a perfect line near the far fence, back to back, as if waiting for a signal. And the scary part? The guards didn't notice it happening. The Kingmaker hadn't shouted. He hadn't passed notes. He hadn't made a scene. He had spent the entire night before, during Phase 1, whispering one sentence to each group. Just wait for the sunrise. You'll know what to do. But he never said what they should do. And yet every group independently moved into formation. As if his words alone had planted instructions inside their minds. As if he'd choreographed the entire yard without ever leaving his cell. The warden immediately ordered every guard to the perimeter. But it was too late. Something was about to break. The Kingmaker steps out of his cell. When guards reached his door expecting him to be pacing or shouting, he was sitting calmly on his bunk, hands folded, eyes forward. Just like the ghost. Just like the surgeon. Just like the prophet. All 4 deadly inmates were in the exact same posture. Almost like they were waiting for someone. A guard shouted, "Why did you call the warden? What's happening in the yard?" The Kingmaker finally looked up. And he smiled. Not a mocking smile. Not a threatening one. A knowing smile. He replied softly, "This isn't my move. I just didn't want to miss the look on your faces." "What move? Whose move?" the guard demanded. The Kingmaker nodded toward the yard. "His." "His who?" The Kingmaker whispered. "Number 5. The guard's stomach dropped. Because the 5th deadly inmate, the one no one talked about, the one whose name officers wouldn't even say out loud, hadn't done anything yet. And the fact that the yard was falling into chaos before he even acted meant one thing. Whatever was coming next was far worse than a riot. Police car light, the chain reaction begins. In the yard, the tension snapped. 2 rival groups moved at the exact same time, not toward each other, but toward the guard tower. Another group moved toward the entrance gate. Another toward the far corner where the cameras had blind spots. Not to attack. Not to fight. But positioning themselves. Waiting. Reacting to something unseen. Something predicted. Something planned. And upstairs, the prophet pressed his palm to the glass of his solitary door. And whispered a single chilling word. "Now." The ghost lifted his head. The surgeon exhaled. The Kingmaker closed his eyes. All of them knew what was about to happen. All of them were waiting for the 5th inmate. The architect. The one inmate who didn't need strength, intelligence, or manipulation. Because his power was something far more dangerous. He understood the entire prison system better than the people who built it. And as the yard moved, as the guards shouted, as radios exploded with warnings, a quiet alarm clicked inside a locked electrical room. A door sensor's light turned green. A steel latch slid open without being touched. The architect, the inmate who could break a prison without touching a door. Before anyone in the yard realized what was happening, Before the guards understood the pattern forming, before the warden could even react to the Kingmaker's warning, the architect had already begun. He was the fifth inmate. The quietest. The most underestimated. The most terrifying. Because unlike the others, he didn't need to be physically present to destroy a system. He understood prisons the way a master musician understands an instrument. Intimately, completely, with perfect precision. He knew electrical panels. He knew emergency power grids. He knew sensor systems, blind spots, pressure locks, and structural weak points. Some inmates learned routines. But the architect? He learned systems. And this morning, as sunrise washed over the prison walls, he made his first move. Electric plugged the electrical room that should have stayed locked. At 6:17 a.m., deep below the prison, beneath the yard, beneath the blocks, beneath the medical unit, a small electrical door eased open on its own. Only maintenance staff had access. Only 2 keys existed. But surveillance caught something strange. The lock didn't break. It didn't force. It didn't glitch. It simply unlocked. Like someone knew the exact microsecond the security cycle reset, and timed it perfectly. The architect was that someone. Because years before he became one of the most deadly inmates in the US, he was something very different. A structural systems engineer. Not just any engineer, the kind who designed emergency power sequences for government buildings. He knew how circuits behaved under stress. He knew how locks reacted to sudden temperature changes. He knew how backup generators responded to uneven loads. He was a problem solver. And the terrifying part? He built systems that could survive attacks. So he knew exactly how to break them. How he learned the prison better than the prison learned him. When the architect was first brought into the system, officers laughed. He wasn't big. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't look like a threat. But he observed. Constantly. Quietly. Relentlessly. He watched how long it took guards to complete rounds. He counted the seconds between each camera rotation. He memorized the flicker of old lights that hinted at weak wiring. He listened to the echo of every hallway to understand wall thickness. He even used the temperature of the water in his cell sink to determine which pipes connected to which floors. The man lived and breathed analysis. And while other inmates threatened with fists or weapons, the architect threatened with understanding. Chart decreasing what he did during the blackout. The night before, when the entire prison went dark for 7 seconds, most inmates panicked. The ghost moved silently through the hallway. The surgeon dismantled a medical cart. The prophet sensed the rhythm shifting. The Kingmaker planted seeds in the yard. But the architect, he remained completely still. Listening. Counting. Feeling the vibrations in the floor as circuits died and then surged back online. He didn't need cameras. He didn't need tools. He needed only information. And he got everything he needed in those 7 seconds. Because he heard something no one else noticed. The power didn't fail. It was redirected. That meant someone inside the prison had triggered a sequence. Someone who understood the system. Someone like him. But the sequence wasn't perfect. It glitched for 2 milliseconds in a way he recognized instantly. A design flaw he'd seen years earlier, in a government report no one else had read. His eyes widened. Not in fear. In recognition. He whispered, "They're finally using it." Who were they? No one knew. But the architect did. And he adjusted his plan accordingly. Round pushpin 6:18 a.m. The first switch. Back in the electrical room, the lights flickered. A switch flipped upward on its own. A breaker slammed down. A small indicator light changed from red to green. It looked like a simple malfunction. But it wasn't. The architect had timed the system perfectly. He predicted the moment the facility would perform its daily surge check. He predicted the exact load the system would carry. He predicted the split-second window when pressure on the circuit locks would drop. And he used that moment to slip through the system, using nothing but timing and previous knowledge. The result? 38 doors across the prison silently entered sleep mode. Not unlocked. Not open. Just vulnerable. Waiting for one more command. Waiting for him. Police car light guards don't notice. But the prophet does. Upstairs in solitary, the prophet lifted his head. He whispered, "The walls are humming." The guard nearest him frowned. "What does that mean?" The prophet smiled, a small eerie smile. "It means the foundation is shifting." He placed his hand on the wall. Closed his eyes. Listen. He heard something the guards couldn't. The tiny clicks of dormant systems waking. One by one. Following a pattern. A countdown. A sequence. A blueprint. The prophet whispered, "The architect has started phase 2. The guard stepped back in panic. Phase 2 of what? But no answer came. Not from him. Not yet. Because the answer was rising from below the prison, traveling through wires, pipes, and vents. An answer built from electricity. Round pushpin 6:19 a.m. The yard reacts. The inmates in the yard didn't know why they moved. They didn't know about the electrical door. They didn't know about the breaker. They didn't know that dozens of locks were now vulnerable. But they felt something. A change in air pressure. A vibration in the ground. A shift in the rhythm, the same rhythm the prophet always talked about. Like a drumbeat getting faster. And that sensation made them move differently. More alert. More focused. The guards radioed frantically. Why are they moving toward the tower? Why is everyone facing the same direction? What is going on in cell block D? But no one had answers. Because no one realized that the inmates weren't responding to each other. They were responding to the system. Exactly as the architect predicted they would. Because he didn't need to control people. He needed only to set variables. He didn't need to give orders. He needed only to tilt the environment. The ghost used shadows. The surgeon used precision. The prophet used patterns. The kingmaker used people. But the architect? He used the prison itself. Page facing up the blueprint no one was supposed to have. 2 months earlier, during a routine search of the architect's old cell, guards found something stunning. A folded sheet of paper hidden inside a book's spine. A diagram. A rough outline of the prison's structure. Not complete. Not detailed. But accurate enough to scare the administration. When questioned, the architect simply responded, "I don't need blueprints. I built my own." They tightened restrictions after that. Took his books. Limited his movement. Isolated him. But it didn't matter. Because he didn't need drawings. He needed memory. And this morning, as the prison descended into coordinated chaos, he remembered everything. 6:20 a.m., the second switch. Another breaker flipped. This one triggered a backup compressor. The compressor caused a pressure shift. The pressure shift caused a sensor glitch. The sensor glitch caused 3 cameras in Block B to freeze for exactly 0.8 seconds. Not long enough for an escape, but long enough for someone to move. Someone like the ghost. He stepped forward during that window. Just one step. But in ghost language, one step meant everything. It meant he was moving into position. For what? Only the architect knew. Chart decreasing, the warden realizes the truth. Upstairs in the control room, the warden watched monitors flicker. One camera froze. Then another. Then another. "Are we under cyber attack?" he shouted. The tech officer shook his head rapidly. "No, sir, this isn't external. It's internal. It's the system reacting to itself." "How is that possible?" The officer swallowed hard. "It's acting like someone predicted its cycle." The warden froze. Only one inmate could do that. Only one inmate had ever understood the system well enough. The architect. He whispered. "He's not breaking out. He's breaking us." Round pushpin back in his cell. He stands up. Until sunrise, the architect had been sitting calmly, quietly, blending into the background. A ghost in plain sight. But at 6:21 a.m., as the second breaker tripped, he stood, slowly, deliberately, like a man following choreography. He walked to the center of his cell, placed his hands behind his back, tilted his head upward toward the ceiling vent, then whispered, "Phase 2 confirmed." The vent clicked. A tiny puff of air escaped. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't random. It was a signal. One that traveled through the ducts, down the hall, into the solitary block, past the medical unit, and up toward the yard. A signal meant for one person only, the prophet. 6:22 a.m., the prophet reacts. The moment the air shifted, the prophet's eyes snapped open. He pressed both hands against the glass. He whispered, "I see it now. The pattern is complete." The guard nearest him stepped back. "What pattern? What are you seeing?" The prophet didn't answer. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward the yard. And smiled. Not with joy. Not with malice. With recognition. The way someone smiles when a long, confusing puzzle finally makes sense. Round pushpin, the final trigger. In the electrical room, a tiny red LED on the corner of the panel began to blink. Slow pulse. Slow pulse. Slow pulse. Then, blink, 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 blink. A code. A rhythm. A countdown. For inmates had played their roles. The ghost, movement. The surgeon, tools. The prophet, timing. The kingmaker, behavior. But all of it meant nothing without the fifth. The architect, the one who set the stage. And this blinking code? It was the trigger for the next step. A step none of the guards were prepared for. A step that would shake the entire prison system. A step that would reveal why all 5 inmates moved during the blackout. And why they were acting now. Because something larger was unfolding. Something none of the staff understood. Something that didn't look like a riot, or an escape, or revenge. Something far more coordinated. Something planned for years. The LED stopped blinking. And a soft click echoed through the electrical room. The third switch was about to flip. When the 5 became 1 inch, the third switch flipped. Not loudly. Not violently. Just a soft click, almost gentle. But that sound changed everything. In the yard, every inmate stopped moving at the same time. In solitary, the prophet lowered his hands. In medical, the surgeon breathed out slowly. In his cell, the ghost tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. And in the deepest part of the prison, the architect whispered, Phase 3. The prison's central system shuddered as if something alive inside it had woken from a long sleep. Lights dimmed. Cameras looped. Locks froze. But they didn't open. Not a single door opened. Not one latch released. Not one inmate escaped. Instead, something stranger happened. The entire prison grid reset itself, but not into chaos. Into order. A new order. An order created by all 5 inmates working together. Fire the reveal, what they were really doing. Everyone expected a breakout. Everyone expected violence. Everyone expected these 5 deadly inmates to destroy the system from the inside. But that wasn't their goal. Not tonight. Not during the blackout. Not at sunrise. The architect hadn't been opening doors. He had been locking them. The tensions in the yard weren't preparing for an attack. They were positioning themselves for safety. The surgeon wasn't building a weapon. He was building a diagnostic device made from cart parts. The ghost wasn't moving toward violence. He was signaling. And the prophet? He wasn't predicting chaos. He was predicting something much larger. Because at 6:24 a.m., the ground shook. A distant explosion rumbled from outside the facility. Not inside. Outside. Near the visitor center. Near the loading bay. Near the only entrance trucks used to deliver supplies. The warden froze. The guards froze. Every inmate froze. This wasn't a riot. This wasn't a takeover. This wasn't an escape. This was an attack from the outside. Someone, not the inmates, had planned to hit the prison at sunrise. Someone who knew the routines. Someone who knew guard rotations. Someone who wanted all external systems vulnerable. But they didn't know something else. 5 deadly inmates were smarter than them. Stop sign what the 5 were actually doing. The architect had rerouted the power to lock the facility tighter. Stronger. Unbreakable. The ghost had positioned himself to decode movement patterns faster than any human camera operator. The surgeon had created a tool to read electrical resistance and detect system breaches. The Kingmaker had moved inmates strategically so none would be caught in blind spots or crossfire. And the prophet? He was the one who predicted the exact second the attack would happen. He warned the others with 2 words. At sunrise. Not because he was on the attacker's side, but because he had seen the pattern in the prison's routines. They weren't planning a breakout. They were preventing something worse. Saving the prison. Saving the guards. Saving the inmates who didn't deserve what was coming. The moment everything made sense. The explosion outside shook the walls again, closer this time. Alarms blared. Officers scrambled. The warden's radio screamed with static. Unknown attackers at the west gate. Repeat, unknown attackers. Explosives found, secondary device detected. The entire facility went into shock. Except the 5. They remained perfectly still. They had done everything they could. It was up to the guards now. The warden, shaking, ran to the control board. He flipped the override switch. Lights surged back to full power. Cameras snapped into clarity. Doors relocked with reinforced pressure. The entire system stabilized instantly. The architect closed his eyes with a calm breath. The Kingmaker nodded to himself. The surgeon sat back down on his bed. The ghost returned to his bunk, disappearing into stillness. And the prophet whispered, "The rhythm has returned." Round pushpin aftermath, the story that was never told. Hours later, the attack team outside was arrested by responding tactical units. They never breached the walls. Never made it past the gate. Never touched the inmates. No one inside the prison died. No guards were hurt. No inmates were injured. Because 5 of the most dangerous inmates in the U.S., men capable of tearing a prison down from the inside, chose to hold it together instead. But not out of kindness. Not out of loyalty. Not out of morality. They stopped the attack because they didn't want anyone else controlling the place they already controlled. The warden later said, "They didn't save us. They maintained their kingdom." And that was the truth. These 5 weren't heroes. They weren't villains. They were something much more dangerous. Men who understood the system better than the people running it. Round pushpin the end, a quiet return to normal. By the next morning, the ghost sat quietly, unseen by most. The surgeon read a medical textbook like nothing happened. The prophet stared at the ceiling, listening to patterns only he understood. The Kingmaker whispered to no one, yet the whole yard moved differently. And the architect sat calmly on his bed, hands folded. Not celebrating. Not gloating. Just waiting. Because for men like them, there is always a next phase. But that's a story for another day. The end.